We started Culturally Speaking to indulge our curiosity about the way others live and a desire to inspire conversations about how we have far more in common than we realise.
Hi everyone, welcome back. We are here with the finale of the season. So this season we have really focused on, I guess, the things that are most natural to us, which is our Asianness. And I think it's only fitting that we end with food. Anyone who's listened to this podcast for any amount of time or knows Janice and I will know we are obsessed with food. I think it's fair to say, right?
I mean, just the other day, my partner was commenting to someone else that I just am always thinking about food or thinking about what food to make or making food.
I mean, I dream about food.
I mean, in both our cultures, I think it's fair to say food is such an important part of life. As we were discussing, before recording this episode, I think there are varying degrees to which that is true, depending on, I guess, what family you were brought up in, maybe your immediate social circles, or maybe access to food. So I remember when I first moved here for school, this country is not known for having good food, right?
No,
In fact,
it's fairly safe to say that when people think British cuisine, they don't think of like gastronomical heights.
It has really improved, I must say,
Yes.
especially because we live in London. We are exposed to a lot of very different cuisines made to a very good standard, I would say.
And I think I would differentiate between British cuisine and the experiences of food in Britain, right? Those are two very different. I would say, like, actually, if you want to eat really well, you can, particularly because we live in London. And I feel like when I go to other places, I am always so grateful that I live somewhere where I can get such a wide variety of food. And as you say, like, whilst, and I'm sure people will come at us and say it's not authentic because it's always adapted to the market, I do feel it is as good as sometimes being in the respective countries.
For me, it's a give and take, right? So earlier this year, I was in Thailand, and obviously all the food was amazing. So from the street foods to, we had a couple of dinners because we were a big family trip. We had a couple of dinners at the resort that was still amazing, but to actual restaurants outside of the resort, really good Thai food. But then I was thinking, what if I didn't want Thai food?
That's, I guess, the benefit of living somewhere where one night you can go for Thai and another night you can go for any other cuisine from pretty much around the world. And you're right, it won't necessarily be as fresh or as good or as in the moment, as it were, if you were in that place, but it does offer varieties. I think I would distinguish between food experiences and actual British cuisine.
Yes. Earlier this season, I think when we were going through growing up in Asian cultures or in Asian families, food, right? And I just wanted to, I hope I haven't repeated myself, but food in Hong Kong has always been very interesting to me. It is very much East meets West, but in an unrecognizable way. So at home, it was, I would say, maybe 60-40, right? 60% of the time it would be Cantonese home cooking. The other 40% is anything you can think of, because I was very fortunate to have had a nanny who has worked in many different countries, right? Through the many different families she's taken care of. So we've had really good, like, Mexican food. She was from the Philippines, so Filipino food. And like, just, I guess, quite American food, because she worked for an American family. And back then in Hong Kong, if you think American food, you would just think, it's probably your McDonald's.
Okay.
Right? There is no branding around American food, but we would have things like, potato skins, loaded potato skins, or that kind of like actual American food. So I think
was there any Kraft mac and cheese? I have to ask.
There was.
Oh,
Not
goodness.
for the fam, right? It would be my afternoon snack when I was little or something. So I mean,
Did
most
you?
of the time though, because we were very much brought up on not having a lot of artificial food.
Mhm.
So most of the time it would be freshly made. And I think
Okay.
these random things, like I had a phase that maybe lasted like 2 weeks, right? But I was hooked on Lunchables. Like,
Wow. I've
but
heard it
I,
all. Janice ate a Lunchable. Even I don't think I've ever had a Lunchable.
and because, for me, this always happens when I get home from school,
Okay.
right? There's that between dinner period where I'm doing my homework and I just need something to munch on. Um, I was given a lot of free rein to decide what I would eat for that particular meal because it was just me.
When you say
So,
a meal, was it really like a snack situation to tide you over until dinner?
yeah, kind of. Yeah, because we would
Cool.
usually wait for our parents to be back for dinner,
Yeah.
which sometimes could be like 7:30 or 8.
That's so interesting. So, like, the timings of your meals actually really, and I guess it varies family to family. But for example, like in the UK, I remember like when I started going to full-time like school versus just like half-day nursery, you'd get invited for tea.
Mm.
They'd be like, as a friend, like, and what that read essentially was like you would go for a play date at someone's house, and
Hmm.
then their mum would feed. When I say their mum, because this was the 90s people, like it generally was their mum. Um, before someone comes at me for being like, it could have been a dad. I promise you, it really wasn't. It's certainly not where I went to school. Um, or another family member if it was like grandma or whatever. Um, and then they would like feed you a meal, and that would be like your evening meal. So going for tea
Mm.
was akin to basically going for dinner. And that's why I was interested to know whether you had the snack situation, but you said like it's a tide you over for dinner. Whereas I
Mm.
think, if I'm remembering it correctly, I think people ate a lot earlier. And that's something my family has always done. Like we do eat an earlier dinner
Mm.
in the evening. Like we don't have a very late evening meal. Like I know friends that eat dinner at like 9. And I'm like, how? Because my grandma and I go to bed. So
I
I'm like,
think,
I can't eat at that time because it just sits on my stomach. Like I went to Spain a few weeks,
mm,
and obviously their dinner doesn't start till like 9:30.
yeah, yeah.
Um, and so I was finding myself having that substantial snack at like 6 o'clock because that's the
Mm.
time I was ready to eat. But obviously, it's not the time there.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the eating later probably would have been when I was a little bit older, because, I slept at 9 until quite old, actually. So, but also what I wanted to point out about the fusion style food is not what you would imagine fusion food to be now. It's usually, Hong Kong people adapting whatever the West has introduced. So it's not what we class as fusion today. This is truly fusion, in my opinion. So a while ago, I posted on my Instagram about the Hong Kong French toast.
Yes, I
That's
remember.
a perfect example of what I mean. So French toast used to be a thing for the wealthy, right? They would use brioche and cream and a lot of these really indulgent things, but local Hong Kong people would not be able to afford that or to have easy access to brioche, I'm assuming. And so it became, your typical white bread crust off, and we
Mm-hmm.
added peanut butter in it, and they're deep
Ooh,
fried in a wok traditionally, right?
the peanut butter is an interesting addition.
So good. So, so good. And sorry for people with a peanut allergy, but it's so good. Um, so it's always things like that. And when I started going to school and we had lunch at school, I think after year maybe 4 or 5 is when I stopped bringing food to school, or when my nanny stopped bringing food to me. And we could
Wait,
have the
hold up a second.
Yes.
Your nanny used to bring it to school, i.e., like fresh in the middle of the day.
Years 1 and 2, yes. So I think
Wowzers.
it wasn't just my family, it was everyone.
No, I
Um,
know. I'm just saying, like,
mm,
it wasn't the concept of. So if you think here, right, the lunchbox, like, you
yes.
carry your lunch in with you if you bring it in.
Mm,
It gets stored away, usually in like a cold room to
mm.
keep it all cool. And that's like, there's nobody coming in to bring you your lunch.
See, I
That is
find that
epic.
so I think, and it might not be every child in Hong Kong, by the way. I did go to like the top girl school in Hong Kong, so it might be a bit extra. But I think it was to tide you over transitioning from half day nursery
Okay.
to spending full days at school. So at lunchtime, your nanny or your mum or your dad could come and have lunch with you, and then you have the rest of your
Uh,
day. Yeah.
so you're like, I don't know if your nanny did, but like essentially your nanny could have stayed and kept you
Oh no,
company during like,
she did, yeah, she did.
oh, she did. Okay,
Yeah, yeah,
cool.
yeah, yeah.
Oh,
So
that's so lovely. But okay, so here's the social issue I have, right? Do I sit with my nanny or my mom or my dad or my grandmother?
everyone
Or
just sits together. Like
oh,
they had
but
these
okay.
big benches. You all just sat together.
And does she eat her lunch at the same
No,
time?
no, nobody,
That's interesting.
no adult eats
Oh, so she eats like later or whatever.
before or whatever. Yeah.
Oh, I don't know how I feel about that. It's like being watched while you're eating, and I'm very shy when I'm eating. I don't actually like to be watched.
I guess as a 5, 6 year old, the important part there is the company of
Oh,
someone
that's
from
so
home.
funny. That is actually hilarious.
And then I did start bringing my own food for like maybe a few years before school canteen. And what you said just now, right, with your lunch boxes kept in a cool storage, can't comprehend. Food has to be hot for me. Like for main meals, there has to be a hot element. And I keep seeing these videos of like Japanese school kids in the
Yeah.
winter, one, wearing really short skirts, and two, they have these bento boxes, but everything's
Yeah.
cold. Just can't get it. Just don't know.
But do you know it's so funny? So in the UK, yeah, I agree. Like having the cold school, like it's and again, like in most schools, there's the option to go and like have hot food at the
Mm.
like the canteen if you like, but not necessarily like if you're going to bring in your own hot food, it has to come in a thermos, right?
Loved my thermos when I was a child in primary school. Mine was a pink Hello Kitty one.
Of course it was. Of course it was. Um, but like if you go and I remember like you and I having this conversation as you were asking me about tiffins in India
Mm-mm.
and the
Yeah.
stacked. So if
Yes.
anyone doesn't know what we're talking about, essentially, it's very common in India. There are essentially what is like a bento box, but instead of internal compartments, it's a stack of small tubs, one on top of
Mm-hmm.
another, that fit together, quite often metal.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody will come around at lunchtime and they will either deliver or sell these to people that are working so that they can have a hot lunch, which is what you're describing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's,
It's the
I
only
think it,
way.
I agree in the sense of like the food is fresh, it's hot, it keeps you. I think there's something more nourishing about that kind of meal than, and this is still in like, and that's the other thing I'd like to point out is these are hot countries, right? Most of the year.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no like, oh, I need a salad to cool down. Do you know how like where it hits 30 degrees in London and we're like, oh, I thought cooking in the heat. Like,
I think, yeah, I mean, perhaps, I mean, in Hong Kong at least, things were air conditioned, right? But also, it's the element of soup that's so important to me. And also,
yes.
one thing in Hong Kong, in the summer, school is only half a day. So there isn't the whole lunchbox situation anyway.
Okay.
Um, but I remember when I used to bring my own lunch, it started with, I had like a stacked thermos. So you had an inner stack of pots. It would be the biggest one would be soup, and then the middle one would be rice, and then there would be, whatever the dish was. Usually from the night before, if I remember correctly. Sometimes I get freshly made food in the morning. But then I think my demand for soup increased to a point where it became the largest one was rice. I had a veg thing and a meat thing, and then I had a separate thermos just for soup. And soup is just like the cornerstone of, I would say, 90% of the meals in my family.
Yeah, I remember you telling me like there's always a soup. It doesn't
Yes.
matter the weather, the season, the
Yes.
occasion, and you'll often just make one daily.
Yes. Because it's not good to keep kind of vegetables stewing in
Yeah.
liquid overnight. So and we had the luxury, right, of having a nanny who would go buy fresh produce every morning from the markets. So it's a very different eating culture, in my opinion. Like, even for people who can afford it here, I don't think that's as valued, the freshness of things.
I agree. Like, and I think it's not even, I mean, in India as well, it's the same as the freshness, right, of the food market. And it's not even necessarily tied to wealth there. I mean, of course, people
Exactly.
that have maids, have the ability and the means to go out, but it's not considered the ultimate luxury to be able to for the fresh food. And sometimes that's quite down, like I said, I mean, climate, first of all, and the food that is produced within the country itself versus import. And the keeping of food, right? So even if you buy fresh fruit one day, here, like I leave out fruit on a kitchen counter.
Me too.
Right? Apart from fruit that I know needs to be refrigerated. And to be honest, it will keep. That isn't necessarily the same there. Like you can't necessarily keep a bunch of bananas there for a few days and they may not keep the same way, right?
Yeah.
And you wouldn't want to. So there's nothing unusual about going out and getting that fresh produce regularly. I think the techniques have obviously evolved in time because people have now got access to better like refrigeration, deep freezers, convenience stores. But I don't see, I was in India this time last year. I don't see the aisles of like freezer foods.
Yes.
I've been to other Asian countries, like, I've been to Thailand, I've been to Singapore, I've been, and of course there are big supermarkets, there are areas of refrigeration, but I don't believe it's on the level of like, and I'll again, people may come for me as well this, but and you'll know this being, having got an online presence in food, but the Trader Joe's dinners that people make from like,
my God, yeah,
I don't see that being the same.
It's interesting. Like you made a really good point about the access and storage of foods and also the types of food. So in Asia, there's very few dairy-based things, right? And also it's a lot more of the fresh meat. And one thing about meat is that I think it's changed a little bit now. And also Hong Kong, remember, is quite, I guess, globalized, right? Or somewhat westernized. But fresh meat is always so much more expensive than flash frozen or non-fresh meat. Now, in Hong Kong, it depends on when you go, but most of the time when you go to a market, you can still pick the chicken you want and they kill it in front of you and then cut you up, in whatever form you want the chicken to be in. They can even take off the carcass, take off the skin, like anything you ask for. Whenever there's avian flu, they stop that, right? Because it's dangerous and it could spread. So everything becomes centrally slaughtered.
Okay.
And you'll find suddenly the prices drop a little bit. And if you go to the supermarket, they have these packaged chicken, much like what you would find in our supermarkets. Those are like dead cheap, right? And
are
usually,
they as good?
So growing up, my belief is that they're not.
Yeah.
Because they're not fresh. But of course, this is what I was, told growing up. So I don't have any scientific evidence.
Okay.
But that's the general concept that no one buys frozen meat unless they have to.
Did you find it a culture shock coming to the UK and having to deal with what we call food production here when it comes to meat? Because obviously I've not bought meat in I've been a pescatarian for a long time. And I fish is by and large, it's a similar sort of process, but slightly different. Did you find it very different when you moved here?
Very. So and people who are, don't want to listen to meat related, skip ahead 30 seconds now. But the way we buy meat in a market, all the meat for the different parts are hung up, and you just literally tell the butcher, I want $50 of that. Or you say, I want to make a soup with this, this, and this. Which cut is better? It's for 4 people, and he will cut it off the actual slab in front of you and weigh it in front of you, and then you pay for it. If it's mince that you want, they mince it in front of you. So you know exactly what's gone in.
Yes.
And you can usually buy very, very tiny amounts if you wanted to. Because you're basically, you're pay, hold on. It's almost like a pay as you go thing. Rather than, even now, if you went to Borough Market, for example, where they have butchers with fresh meat, it's already cut. Right, you're just pointing at which piece you want. Yeah.
That's what I was about to ask was, you explained going to the market, picking the chicken. In that situation, do you have to take the whole chicken?
No, so they
say you just wanted, I don't know, like 2 breasts because it was 2 people or whatever.
So first of all, people don't just eat chicken breast.
I know. I'm making a very Western. I'm trying to relate. I know that wouldn't be the case.
So what you would see is at these chicken, are they called butchers still? Let's assume they are also called butchers. So they will have their stall, they have like chickens in the back. They will have a few that they cut that morning.
Yeah.
So in case you wanted to make a stock, and let's say someone early in the day bought a chicken having had the carcass removed, you can buy that carcass.
Yes.
So it's quite zero waste, actually.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And certain parts, for example, if you went to a pork or beef butcher's, the typical person wouldn't go buy, the cow's heart or like lungs or whatever. So those would already have been dealt with and probably sold to restaurants who use it. So I would say the turnover of this economy is like daily. That's why
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And interestingly, you mentioned obviously there are 2 different meats. Do you have butchers that specialize in, say, only pork or only beef, or do they? You do. So
we have a beef guy. Yeah, we have a beef guy. We have a pork guy. We have a chicken lady.
And that's very interesting to me. I think that's something that here I don't or have not seen. People that and I think this also comes back to in Asia. There are stalls, there are vendors, there are restaurants, there are providers that specialize in one thing and they do it incredibly well, right?
Yes.
And they don't do anything else. When I think about street food here in the UK versus street food in India or other parts of Asia, quite frankly, and many people who've been to India will know this, particularly if you've been taken to certain markets, Mumbai, Delhi, whatever. People will say, that's my guy for this. That's my lady for this. Yes. I go here for that. And the stores become infamous for those particular items. And they don't do anything else. There's no like pick and mix the way you go to a food market here and you can get 3 things from one stall. Like, no.
Yeah, like what I used to love as well is there's always a stall, soy products.
Yeah.
Right. So you will find 7 different kinds of tofu related things, but you will also find the preserved tofu cubes, which I think some people will hate, but I love it. And when I was much younger, when I think before SARS, before COVID, and wet markets were still very wet, there would always be like a little old lady sitting on a little plastic stool, and she'll be there like plucking the ends off bean sprouts, and they would all be kind of kept alive in a tray of water. And you can literally say, I want $2 of bean sprouts. Because if anybody has heard me rant about this, why are bean sprouts sold in 300-gram packets here? No one eats that much in one
Because
sitting, and
there's
then they all
always
die.
exactly, and then they're always left over, and they go
Yes.
slimy, and then I feel
So
bad because I don't know what to do
that's
with
what I
them.
miss. That's what I miss. Just buying like one handful of bean sprouts, and you can give her like 20p for it. And they would also have really, really fresh tofu. So that's one thing that I just haven't been able to find here, because everything here is packaged. I think
Yes.
that's what I found really difficult, because then I'm used to, especially when I was younger, I would go to the markets with my nanny because I shouldn't be at home alone. And you could literally pick, I want that specific fish, or I
Yes.
want that cube of tofu, or that bunch of vegetables. So I just prefer that, because sometimes I find packaging to be a little bit tricky, where it could be hiding like a bruised bit,
Yes.
or the size just isn't quite right. It might be too much for one person, but not enough for three, that kind of thing. So for me, food shopping is much more tailor-made in Hong Kong. So there's no wastage ever, because you always buy exactly the amount you need.
And I think that is something that, as time has gone on and perception has moved on, I'd like to think that we're trying to move that way, but I still don't see my shop. When I think about it in the UK, it's still hard to shop like that here. When I think about food markets, I think about farmers markets. It's not the norm, right? It's not that I can.
Yeah.
I laugh because I can walk outside my door here and actually do that, but that's very much down to where I live versus the norm. But yeah, it's very. I think there's a big, and I say this a lot to people, is I think our relationship with food and the cycle of food production is so far removed in the UK.
Yes.
Versus I feel so much more in tune with it in my culture, and particularly when I go to India.
Yeah, I wonder if it's because in this country, right, as we pointed out at the beginning, there is not a hugely there's not a hugely rich history of British cuisine. I believe the two world wars actually caused a big shift, right, in the way we eat. And so a lot of what people eat today are carried over from other cultures, and therefore it's missing the origination part of the whole process. So I'm thinking about, when you came over and made me, home cooked food from your culture. I'm not sure how many people here know how to make a curry from scratch, or using beans that you have to soak overnight to soften, to
Yeah.
rehydrate. I think that whole part is missing, because most of what I cook, if it's Chinese, using things like shiitake mushrooms or red dates, whatever, I have to rehydrate them from the original
Yes.
form. Whereas you can buy these already packaged. And I remember, like, I found it ridiculous that you can buy a ready diced onion.
Yes. And
That I
like ready
know,
sliced, like
yes, and
butternut squash and
of
fruit and
course, there are people who may have arthritis, or who are not, able-bodied enough to manage that, and that's great, right? That's super accessible. But honestly, most people that have bought them that I've seen are not having these problems. They just don't want to do it themselves. And I find that, you know, let's be honest, cooking is not for everyone.
I agree. Like I do
Yeah.
agree with that. But I find it very hard to square that away with a love of food, right? I think they go hand
Yes.
in hand. And I think, and this is probably maybe a slight negative, right? And I'll say this. In my culture, it's assumed that you do know how to cook, like, or you learn how to cook over a period of time.
Both sexes?
No, of course not, Janice. Come on. The patriarchy is real. Now, yes. Okay, right. And I will say, actually, admittedly, the men that I know in my family or my circle do cook very well.
Hold on a minute, but usually chefs are men.
Are men. Exactly. Exactly. All the top Asian chefs, or sorry, Indian chefs, are men. Right?
Mm.
So this, and Asma Khan, who is the owner and founder of Darjeeling Express, which I encourage everyone to go to, by the way, if you do want to experience some food from my culture. But she makes a point of only employing women in the kitchen. And she says something that I think is so apt, you know? It is always the women that huddle in the kitchen, that cook collectively, that share recipes, that hone techniques, that pass these traditions down. Yet, like you say, it is always the men that end celebrated chefs. And it's, and there's just so much we could say about that, but the connotation that as a woman, and you know, I can say this really, is that I must know how to cook and I must love cooking, is very much ingrained in the gender psyche, right? So the idea that somebody doesn't like cooking, doesn't like food, and doesn't want to do it is, even to this day, like, people will still be like, oh. And everyone assumes that their mother, like, you know, your mother must be a great cook. Well, what if you grew up with a mother who didn't like to cook? Well, what do you do? You know, everyone's always like, oh, mother's home cooking. Oh, my mom's cooking.
Yeah.
You know, like, how many people say my dad's cooking is the best?
Actually, in my case, it depends on the dish. So there's a dish which is beef ho fun. Literally, my dad makes it so well. Like, it's always the one thing, if my dad rarely cooks, but now that he's retired, sometimes when I go back, like, he will make certain things that only he knows how to make. So there's a dish, oh, you would love this actually. It is pesky friendly. So we get fresh oysters. So quite big, you know, American oysters.
Yeah.
Pat them dry. You marinate it with a little bit of cooking wine to take out the fishiness. Dry again, and then you kind of lightly coat them with a bit of corn flour, and with a very hot wok of oil, you kind of sear the outside, set them aside, and then freshen up your wok, and then it's ginger, spring onion, and a little bit of seasoning, and you stir fry the whole thing. So good. And this is the one thing I find that usually it's the messy or physically demanding things that my dad does better than my mom.
I was going to say, that sounds quite like you need to be skilled in dealing with a wok that hot, right? To move the oysters, etc. Like,
and the beef noodles as well. Like, that's why we have a special wok for it. It's just for frying noodles. Whereas my mum is much better at the long cook things. So very traditional braised abalone, fish more, like all of those very traditional things. And I would actually agree that some of the dishes, even I can't replicate this exact same flavor. And I think there's a difference. So, you know, and a lot of people who know me listening to this know that I'm crazy about cooking. And cooking is one of the only things I think that I readily admit to being very good at. But there's a very big difference I find when you're tasting someone else's cooking and when you're tasting your own. Yes. Maybe it's just me that I tend to be quite critical, maybe, or same. I'm quite demanding of my own food. And then also somehow when like mums or grandmas or someone else's mum does the cooking, somehow they always feel more heavy-handed with the seasoning.
We have this exact thing. So
right?
Because so yesterday is really going on. I made it, like, at the moment we're in this weird period between Christmas and New Year. So I cooked something for my parents. And there's a dish that my mum makes, my grandmother makes. It's flaked rice. So it's flaked rice. Normally it's done with potatoes. You add and the spicing is very simple. This is supposed to be a very like quick snack almost. But it never tastes the same as hers. Like, and I don't know why, because I've watched her do it 1,000 times and I know how to do it. And I made it and like it was good, but was it the same as my grandmother's? No, because like I think we're quite cautious in the way that we season now versus like the way that my grandmother would season. And even my mum is also cautious, but I don't know, it just tastes so much better.
I think it's the heavy-handedness, because I'm also more of an intuitive cook. Right? I don't measure things unless it's baking.
No.
But it's still, my handful is probably not going to be as big as her handful.
Exactly.
It's just a little bit different. And it's also the sentiment, right? I think at the start we said that food is so important in our culture. It's definitely such an expression of love, in most Asian cultures, I would say. I would equate this to bringing a new neighbor a casserole, in America, or at least that's what I see in movies. That's what people do, in times of death, grieving, that's what you do. And for us, every single occasion leads to a meal, basically.
So we planned the occasion around it. Like, it would be very bizarre for people to get together
without a meal.
Right, to the point where like get-togethers will be planned like timing wise or day wise, like, oh, but can we have this at lunchtime? Will this work for dinner? Like, I watch my mom do it so often, like when she organizes her social diary, her calendar, and she'll be like, but if I invite them at this time, then they'll need a snack and a meal. So like, okay, well, that's fine. So then I know that I can make this, but will it go with that? You're like, that level of
in the opposite way, it would be if we invited them at this time, they'll be gone before dinner. So let's do this time. So you're right.
You hope it's somebody that you want to get, but then do you know where that backfires? Where it doesn't. And then they end up staying for dinner. And then like, because we only buy enough food for like the amount, do you have enough food to serve for dinner?
So that's another thing that my partner, I remember quite a few years ago, he was like, you've always got food. Like, you've always got enough food. I'm like, yeah, my fridge is never empty. It's always topped up. And I'm always ready to hunker down for at least a week. And we'll still have enough food.
Like, at the beginning of COVID, where people were like panic buying and stockpiling their like cupboards. And I was like, the cupboards are fairly full here. Like,
yeah. And I need to, okay, sidebar. I remember going out to my local Waitrose. Look, it's a very middle class area. Okay. So
there's no
I went into Waitrose.
Because also the same.
So all the brown rice, whole grain rice, wild rice was gone. All the white rice was still there. That's how middle class my area is. Like, no one's even eating white rice. And then because also all the Asians in my area, they would shop at Brick Lane, like cash and carries, right? Because we buy rice in the kilos, not in 500-gram packs.
Amen. Like, that to me, I find that still hilarious, because obviously same thing, right? We can't one meal where, right, like, who is my mom would say, who is that gonna serve?
Yeah. And then also, sidebar within a sidebar, where I keep my rice, so because I don't eat a lot of rice or carbs generally, I have a very small like cereal container thing for rice. I have a little piece of paper that says always full. It's something you put usually around Lunar New Year, but then you can keep it on. And it's believed that if your rice tank is empty, that does not bode well for your family.
Well, it's not good fortune, is it?
Yeah, like I always keep mine not empty. It doesn't have to be full, but it can't be. Yes. So back to the original Waitrose sidebar. So I went there to buy, I don't know, something random. I think I wasn't there to stockpile. I just wanted some milk or fruit or something. This guy in front of me, this like older gentleman, he had half a trolley full of Mr. Kipling's Fondant Fancies. And I'm like, mate, is this what you're stockpiling on? You're going to get diabetes before the end of week 1. That was the only thing he bought, like, half a trolley. Oh, and loo roll. Those are two things he bought.
Do you know those Mr. Kipling fondant fancies actually
never
have
had
very
one.
long shelf life, I believe. Like, it makes you wonder what the hell is in them. Because I'd be worried about them going out of date, you know, like if you buy that much
Yeah.
of something. But
But
preservatives galore.
what a thing to stockpile on. Like,
I mean, people stockpile all sorts of things, don't they?
I think the most practical things are like tinned like beans or like dried beans. You know, things like
Which
that
is
that are
really
vacuum
interesting.
packed.
It's like you were saying about rehydration. Like, I don't use tinned beans
Mm.
because to me it's really like foreign. Like,
Oh
I've
my
always
God. Have you seen those like peas and carrots and potatoes in a tin?
yeah. So like I remember. So you talked about going around for tea to people's house, right? I
Yeah.
said when I was young, that's the thing. People would eat those things.
It's not that hard to boil a potato. Like beans, I get it. You need to soak it overnight, like whatever. Like I get it. But potatoes? At least frozen peas are better than peas in a tin, I would think.
Carrots.
No.
Yeah, exactly.
I've never eaten those, and I know there are things like pies in a tin.
No, what? No, rewind. Pie. What? A pie?
Not a sweet one, like a savory one. It's just all
How?
stuffed in a tin, I think. Like a
How?
platter
how?
tin. I don't know, like I've seen a lot of tinned goods. And look, also no shame, yeah. In Hong Kong, we did have, I think I told you this before and it really irked you, but we had like baked beans with rice. And these are
Yeah.
like emergency times if we don't have enough food or whatever.
Fine,
Or
but like it's not a staple. It's like, for example, like I mean,
no,
we were talking about, influences
I
relative.
love a bit of spam.
Um, right. So like people have spam sushi, right?
What?
Yeah.
Okay, for me, spam is what, so I also didn't grow up with spam, the spam you get here, right? We had
What other
different
kind of
spam.
spam is there?
Well, spam is a brand, right?
Yeah.
The spam I grew up eating is not this brand, it's like a Asian brand. And there's also another one which is still a luncheon ham situation, but it's called tulip ham. Like, I think the brand is tulip and it's Danish. And it's actually not what spam is. This is actually like a chunk of ham that you would buy for roasting. It's just this, it's in a tin.
Like a
So,
gammon almost.
yes. So it's not like a
Ah.
reformed meat situation.
Ah.
And we had tinned fish, so not just tuna, but we had like the sardines, we had I don't even know
That,
what the
yeah, like you get like sardine, you get
yeah,
sardines, you get mackerel, you get tuna. Like, I've
yeah.
seen that. I do get
Oh,
that.
I love a good like smoked mussel.
In a tin.
Yeah.
How do you get a smoked mussel in a tin?
John West does it. You
No
get it.
way.
Yeah,
See,
smoked
you could tell
oysters
I
and
just
smoked
avoid
mussels.
this aisle completely.
No, it's quite good actually on a bit of like biscuit.
Oh, okay, maybe I
Yeah.
need to try that.
Yeah.
So
Um,
interesting.
but I wanted to ask you like what can you tell me a little bit of, housewives' tales around? Because I remember one episode we talked about what you ate when you were ill. But
Yeah.
are there any things that you've grown up being told you shouldn't eat or you should eat more of?
So like one of the things that I always get told is like fish and dairy shouldn't be consumed together.
Hmm. Really?
Yeah, but when I think about like a lot of Western dishes, they do have fish and like dairy together. But that's something that people, and I don't know why, but that is something that always people you get told. Um, we believe like, and we've talked again about this,
Mm.
and I think it's the same in Chinese medicine. I don't know, but like there's hot foods, cold foods,
Yes.
and seasonally, like you should eat some things, you shouldn't eat others,
Yes.
if depending on if you want to be hot or cold, and also your own like your natural body composition.
Mm.
So yes, in that sense. I mean, there's a lot of like when you're sick, you should eat this. When you're, and I think we've touched on some of that. Um, I guess like the way you start your day or the way you end your day. So, for example, like there are people who would be like horrified that people fast for like intermittently for 12 hours because they'd be like, that goes against your body and your digestion, and like it's not good for you to be on an empty stomach for that long. And similarly, like ending a meal, like a lot of people will use things like fennel, like roasted dry fennel, as a digestion method. Same way people have fennel teas.
Yes.
Right? Things like that. And I think the other big thing is like the times at which you eat and then sleep. So the concept of this really big, heavy evening meal isn't necessarily something that they do there. Like it's much more like you should have that in the middle of the day.
I think that's generally a good rule though, because how are you supposed to go to bed?
Well, that's what I always worry about is like, and obviously here it's just not as practical. I can't always eat a big meal at lunch and a little one at dinner.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't work with the lifestyle we have, but I won't eat really, really late and have a really big meal. Like I can't fathom that.
Do you also have like special meanings in foods for certain occasions? Because I think I told you for Lunar New Year, like all of the names of the dishes are kind of like puns for good blessings.
That's so funny. So like if it's something good, if it's like a good occasion, you have to have something sweet to end the meal. And depending on like what it is, like depends on what you get served. Diwali like definitely has certain foods that are only made that time. Yeah, and also the preparation of those foods is a big part of the tradition because it's about making it communally together, having that kind of I guess it's almost fellowship to it, and the meaning of the food. I think there are other religious occasions where again like the meaning of the food itself, like the word, translates to like either sweetness or good or like fortune or prosperity. And those are foods that we would like must have if you think of it like that.
I just find Indian sweets too sweet, like gives me a toothache.
But I think as well because you've probably eaten a lot of, again, like commercially produced sweets versus a home cooked sweet, which shouldn't be the kind that like makes your tooth fall off. It should be a bit more subtle. Because you control the amount of sugar. And also like it shouldn't be made with traditionally with refined sugar, right? It should be unrefined. Which gives a very different taste, but commercially produced sweets will be like what you've experienced.
I think to be fair, it's also because I don't prioritize sweet foods.
And neither do I, which I'm not the best person to talk to about sweet because I don't eat that way personally, because it's not what I enjoy. Like I enjoy very savory, like umami kind of foods. So yeah.
And on that very sweet note, I think we'll end it there. Hopefully this season we've shared our thoughts and our views on being Asian, being our types of Asian, without generalizing. And hopefully you enjoyed listening to us.
Subscribe, rate and review on your favourite podcast platform and follow us on Instagram at Culturally Speaking Podcast. You can also check out our website culturallyspeaking.co.uk for a transcript of this episode. Share your stories or your show ideas with us by sending us an email at theculturallyspeaking@gmail.com.